Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's webcast. My name is Dina M. Pagan, ARF's Marketing Manager and your moderator for today. Before we begin our journey towards unified marketing analytics, please be aware of our house rules. We are aiming to provide the best webcast experience possible. You can help us execute this by keeping yourself muted and your computer web cameras turned off. The audio will be streamed. This means that you will be able to hear us throughout your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use the teleconference option, please use the information provided on your screen. Additionally, I will post the information on the chat box throughout the webcast. ARF does not own the copyrights to the presentation. However, the session will be recorded. If you would like to view the recorded event, the file will be available within 2 weeks from today. We are extending the conversation on social media. If you would like to join us, please use hashtag #ARFWebcast. You can also find us on Twitter with a handle @the_ARF. If you're interested in hosting a webcast of your own, please contact me at zina@thearf.org. Our next webcast will be held on June 7th with Turner and RMT, where we will review findings from our research that plans for a comprehensive ROI optimization test as part of ARF's How Advertising Works program. Also, if you're in the Chicago area on July 13th, Leo Burnett will be hosting the ARF for our next cross-platform session. Thank you to our sponsors, CBS Vision, ESPN, LiveRamp, Pinterest, Simulmedia, and Turner for their support of this event. And last but not least, join us for our Audience Measurement Conference in June. We've added Sunday to our programming to allow for more networking opportunities. We will be in a new location that has great views of the New York City skyline over in New Jersey. So please join us for that event as well. If you're interested in any of these events or other ARF programs, you can visit our website for further details, or you can contact me, Zina@thearf.org, and I'd be happy to help you out. And without further delay, I present to you today's webcast, Navigate the Complex Journey Towards Unified Marketing Analytics with Joy Joseph from IRI and George Musi of Blue 449.
Thanks,
Joy,
Dina.
take it away.
Thank you. This is Joy Joseph here, practice leader with IRI, and I have with me as my co-navigator in this journey, George Musi from Blue 449. And we did a webinar on this topic last year. That was more of a ground setting. This has been a hotly debated topic in terms of integration of different marketing performance approaches. And today we are looking at going further deeper and what does it exactly mean to have unified marketing analytics. And we'll dive into some discussion around kind of the landscape that leads to some of the conflicting approaches in recent times and discussions in the industry. And then we'll close up with some vision for the future, the way we are headed with unified analytics. With that, I'll hand it over to George Musi from Blue 449.
Thanks, Joe. Everyone, how are you? Thank you for joining. It's a great topic to speak on, one that's being contested from many different places. I think you'll walk out of here with some really interesting perspectives about potentially some different ways of thinking about this topic and applying it towards whatever level of analytics or function that you're dealing with your businesses. The agenda is going to be kind of robust. We're going to go through a whole bunch of things. We're going to set the groundwork about why we're having this conversation from a marketing and business perspective. So we'll give you a little bit about the past, present, and future of marketing and how analytics and data enables that. And then Joy will look at providing more breadth and depth about the evolution and revolution of marketing performance management, and then some perspectives about where we are today versus where we think we need to be, and then work our way towards some areas that we should be progressing in the short term. And then we'll close it out with some Q&A. So I don't think anybody's going to argue that the media landscape has changed and is increasingly changing and also increasingly dynamic in that change. It's significant fragmentation. It's multiple screens, platforms, devices, places, and it's causing a lot of angst as it relates to measurement not just traditional GRPs, TRPs, ROI, but just the unification and comprehensiveness of that measurement as it relates to the validation of your marketing spend, which has always been the top priority of CMOs. When you look at the current state that we live in today, you have kind of this bifurcation and also unification of mindset. So you have consumers that are overwhelmed with choice. They have a lot of different areas to go to, a lot of different avenues to consume, a lot of different avenues to share. And at the same time, this breadth and depth of choice, which is ultimately good for the consumer, it's great from a marketing perspective because you have more avenues to touch the consumer with richer experiences, but the ability to actually understand the value of each one of those touch points, more importantly, the comprehensive value of those touch points increasingly becomes difficult, and it's causing a lot of angst for marketers and advertisers. This complex media landscape is evolving at many different levels. Technology is evolving. I mean, you just have to look at the Lumascape and see the evolution of the ad tech space and marketing ad tech space. Within that evolution, you have the manifestation of data. Data becomes an empowering thing, but also can be a very drowning thing, depending how you set up to take full advantage of that. The other thing that is causing, in both the consumer and more in the marketer's eyes, is this notion of complexity causes confusion. And that confusion causes lack of confidence about the best way to treat this environment, the best way to understand value, and therefore predict the way to leverage this environment for marketing. You've had a lot of influential people, probably none more so than Mark Burchard from P&G. He's very vocal about the necessity of validation, valuation, transparency, consistency, conversion. He's made it a topic at every point the last few years, more so this last year, about how agencies, their partners, need to be able to step up their levels of accountability. And that accountability, in the most recent terms, has been this notion of transparency and verification and validation. But what he's also saying is this notion of having comprehensive measurement of marketing. At the end of the day, they're spending money on marketing to be able to drive sales. And he doesn't feel confident that he has the totality of understanding of how that marketing holistically is driving sales, but more importantly, how the individual channels within themselves are doing that, and then how they interrelate with one another to drive sales. So he's asking for agencies and measurement companies to step up their game to arm him with that type of intelligence. So a very important topic. So we'll give you a little bit about the marketing landscape and how we're seeing it from a performance perspective. And this will set up, I think, a good foundation for Joy to take you through some of the measurement techniques. So this evolution of media and marketing is resulting in this complex and multidimensional consumer journey, right? So screens, places, devices is kind of fragmenting the way the consumer moves in and out through a typical day. So we call it a day in the life of the consumer, right? What they're doing and how they're doing and why they're choosing to do certain things. And some of these things are simultaneous. They go in and out of mindsets because of the necessity and behaviors that they're trying to achieve. Sometimes they're very unified. Sometimes they're very isolated. But it's causing this very multidimensional way. And then through that, the way they're consuming media and content. The other thing, as consumers move between screen, places, and moments, the sense of mobility becomes a very empowering thing for consumers, right? They're no longer bound by time, place, right? This notion of having a dedicated time to consume is no longer a binding thing for consumers. Mobility has changed the way they consume content, they engage with brands, they share, they participate, and it transcends screens, places, and moments for them throughout the day. And the other thing that this is doing is providing a lot of rich data signals. And this is probably one of the most important elements of this evolution of media is that it creates a lot of data. The importance of this is that we have now a lot of information that we can ingest into more evolved models to be able to give us more breadth and depth of understanding of how media marketing, external, internal factors, promotional, price, are all coming together to basically drive consumer behavior, consumer consideration, and ultimately sales. Through all this change and through all this complexity and through all this evolution, the one thing that has remained constant, that I argue all the time, is the fundamental objective of media marketing have not changed. And I will argue that they will never change. There is still this necessity of the market and the consumer, and the marketer's job is to impact the consumer to buy a product. What's changed is everything else in the middle. The relationship of right person, right message, right time, right place, right context has not changed. That will never go away. That is the holy grail of media and marketing. How we do this and the measurement frameworks and the techniques and the evolutions of modeling allows us to create a better relationship so we can build better media campaigns, understand their consumer decision journey a lot more detailed, so we can create a better relationship to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time in the right place under the right context to be able to incite a behavior because we're presenting something that is that compelling to them. This complex atmosphere that is being defined by complexity of media, complexity of data, is creating this need for marketers to actually make sense of this myriad and disparate sources of information. So there's a lot of information, a lot of it siloed, not really connected the best way it can. So there's a necessity of systems, unification, or what we call them intelligence systems, to unify this data in a way that makes it the most relevant, transform that data into meaningful insights, and then those insights to lead to implications, recommendations, and actions, so therefore we can go after the right person with the right message at the right time in the right place under the right context. So Joy will talk to you about a lot of those elements, how we're empowering ourselves to do this, and therefore our marketers to do this through these measurement techniques that we're putting into place. The other thing that we have an ability to do, which is also an important thing, is the ability to reduce the latency from the time that we look at data to the time we make decisions. Historically, there's been a lot of latency. One, many media channels. Two, siloed media teams or marketing teams, siloed data, siloed analytics. In order to manifest the opportunity in the time you need it to take full advantage of it, we have to reduce a lot of friction from the system. So the ability to leverage these evolved models, these integrated measurement frameworks, empowers us to remove a lot of latency from the systems. And what that allows us to do is become more responsive and adaptive as these opportunities present themselves, not necessarily in real time, but leverage them in the right time to make that most meaningful impact. So reducing latency is actually an important component. That allows the measurement techniques to empower us fully. The other thing that it allows us to is take a more iterative approach to how we measure, optimize, and then understand what we're doing is actually making a meaningful impact. The ability of doing something and waiting a year, right? For example, running an MMM once a year or once every 2 years, and then taking those learnings and trying to apply them, it's good, but it's not the best way given the dynamic nature of the environments that we work in. So our ability to leverage these data sources and these advanced, evolved measurement techniques empower us to be more iterative and adaptive in the way we understand marketing's impact into sales, and then to be able to create test and learns, and then take it from a quarterly perspective, understand what we're saying and what we're doing is actually creating a meaningful impact, and then look at our abilities to rejig or re-engineer, not the strategy, but the tactics that support that strategy from a mix and a budget perspective to ensure that we're constantly evolving and we're constantly making marginal gains towards the business. The other thing that we have to be cognizant of is, so we'll talk to you about a lot of science, but I will argue, and I think a lot of you will agree with me on this, is there is an art to the science. We have a lot of smart data practitioners, data scientists, advanced modelers that can understand the right way to structure data, connect data, architect data, run massive models on top of that. But we also need to understand that there is a marketing element to this and there's a business element to this. So we always say we need to leverage the science, right, to win the heart. So putting marketing business context around whatever model produces is going to create a more empowering and ultimately a better plan that should resonate stronger with consumers. So we need a very healthy mix of that. The other thing leading into it is there is an increasingly necessity to have integration across everything. So integration of data, integration of silos, of media marketing, creative content. But as important is this integration of attribution. And attribution is defined in its essence as measurement. So market mix modeling, multi-touch digital attribution, TV attribution, any version of econometric modeling, agent-based modeling, anything of that nature is a way to attribute value of marketing towards an outcome, which is sales. A lot of people in the industry rightly so have argued that there is a necessity of integration and unification of those models to get holistic understandings. So the ability to have both macro and micro understandings, both strategic and tactical investment, right, to understand if the overarching strategy is working, and then what specifically tactical levers are or are not working, and therefore how do you make those pivots to empower the totality of marketing. So this integration of measurement and modeling is increasingly becoming important. When we look at marketing response modeling, and everything that we'll talk to you about today and have talked to you about up to this point is about this notion of response modeling, right? So marketing is in its essence, we do marketing to incite a response for the consumer. Exposure leads to response, response leads to engagement, engagement should lead to perception, perception should lead to an outcome. So we want to incite that and empower that. So there's typically three versions, at least if you take everything that exists today, there's basically three versions to go about doing this. Increasingly, we're seeing, like I mentioned before, the necessity to leverage some version of an ensemble of these three methods, and Joy will talk to you about what that means exactly. Econometric modeling is stable. I think in its essence, it's still as valid today as it has been in history. I think it's evolved the right way. Bottom-ups, you have attribution that has evolved to be more comprehensive within the digital world as the digital world becomes more digital and therefore more addressable. And then this notion of machine learning, and where we're seeing that more, or computer modeling, where we're seeing that, or artificial intelligence. Agent-based modeling, which has been around a long time, is an element that we're seeing manifest that allows us to have more depth of understanding, because it's encompassing a lot more elements in granularity, and it can introduce some things that historically were not as easy to introduce in MMM, like word of mouth, like social media, like brand equity response. Those things that are all important to understand their impact as people change their behavior, and it has that behavior inside sales. And then this notion of marketing performance management, it's important. These things need to work in cohort and in concert with one another, right? So if MMM is this overarching strategic element, you'll need things like TV attribution to be able to understand in granularity if what networks, day parts, time of days, creative types, pod claims. MMM will give you the basic TV ROI. It'll give you some granularity, but it won't give you enough granularity to understand if I had to share shift within TV, what's my best way? Similar to what multi-touch digital attribution will do. So in my argument, I think these things need to work in unison with one another, because they do different things, but they're all trying to do the major thing, which is value the efficacy and efficiency of marketing. And then what we're seeing and what all these evolutions of measurement and modeling are doing is evolving the way we do decisions. So historically, it's been about supporting the right decisions through MMMs and digital attribution, but now what we're seeing with more and more unification of these models is decision guidance, and that's playing in more of the prediction and prescriptive spaces and being empowered more through the advancement of machine learning and artificial intelligence. But we also need to make sure that we're leveraging these things to address kind of the 3 time places that we need to understand in order to do the effective job as an analyst. So we need to make sure that we're understanding the past. Past is important because they'll give you a historical precedence of what has been done for what has been done. Analyzing the present, that gives you the understanding in the context of the realities of the business, the market, all macroeconomic conditions and anything else that could potentially account for today. So the recency is an important element as well. So once you have the past and you've accounted for the recency, is the notion of accurately predicting the future. Once you've gotten really good at that from an empirical perspective, the ability to evolve through prescription is going to become a necessity as well. Ultimately, what all these things are really set out to do is increase clarity. So clarity of understanding of what marketing does or it doesn't do, what media does, it doesn't do, what creative does or it doesn't do. And with that increasing clarity will provide confidence to what marketing's role is in the sales impact, and then the confidence to make strategic architecture decisions or tactical lever decisions, and you'll have the empirical evidence because of the clarity will breed confidence in your investment decisions. And the ultimate goal through all these is you know, in 3 pillars. Connected data. If we have a better connected data, that will start the foundation. Once we have that modeling, the evolution of this will give us broader and deeper insight into what marketing and media and creative and context is doing. And then that will empower and enable us to have timelier, smarter action. So take advantage of the opportunities as they present themselves in a very more informed and educated and empowered way. So now I'll turn it over to Joy to walk you through some of the measurement techniques.
Thanks, George. So basically, George has covered kind of the important evolution of the media landscape and what that has done in terms of creating complexity from a measurement perspective. And what that has done in the marketplace, in the industry, is that it's created some friction. So there's been numerous reports, numerous studies, numerous arguments presented on which one's correct. Marketing mix is measuring all of marketing, including digital, and then attribution is measuring digital, and then other platforms are being added to it, and it's creating all this conflict. And really, there are 3 big factors in here that need to be considered in terms of evaluating the friction and trying to resolve it. First, there's this whole predominant belief in the industry that marketing mix and attribution should be competing. And it's not everybody who believes that, but obviously a lot of people have presented perspectives on that. And then the second thing to keep in mind is that the metrics themselves, so when we compare results as stakeholders, as marketing stakeholders, that the metrics and the language that comes out of marketing mix are different and need to be interpreted differently versus what comes out of an attribution model, and we'll look at that as well. And then finally, after reconciling all of it, after translating and making these results fungible between marketing mix and attribution, there's still going to be some difference. These are different models. So then we'll look at what that means and how you can get past that. So number one, kind of understanding the needs that marketing mix addresses versus attribution, that's critical. The evolution of marketing mix is different from that of attribution. Marketing mix came about to help marketers manage their marketing investments as a whole, as a more strategic planning tool. Typically, marketing processes start with strat plans and annual operating plans, and both of those need kind of some guidance around how to manage marketing investments at the portfolio and brand level. Understand halo relationships that help determine whether you should take an umbrella branding strategy versus kind of house of brand strategy. How should you manage co-branding strategies? And then also managing investments between media and promotional. That's a critical component. So again, these are things that Marketing Mix addresses in addition to two more areas it touches upon is basically targeting growth pockets in terms of markets and consumer segments, as well as then looking at non-marketing drivers. How have these factors impacted my business? And what do I need to do with my marketing investments to compensate or leverage those non-marketing factors? Right? So the advent of programmatic has further kind of complicated things, has created this great divide, right? So there's everything that Marketing Mix did from a strategic allocation and investment perspective, and then attribution focused more on some of the technological aspects of digital execution, and then programmatic has added further complexity as the cadence really became rapid. Right? So that's another reason why we're seeing this debate erupt in the marketplace. That said, Marketing Mix does address in some cases tactical, especially when it comes to offline media. It still does play a role when it comes to tactical management of those investments. TV, for example, up until now, there's a lot of guidance for TV that comes out of Marketing Mixes. So for instance, we have kind of the network level allocation on the left-hand side and the classic Marketing Mix investment curve. How much should I be allocating based on saturation across different campaigns and tactics? So stuff like that still, from a tactical perspective for offline marketing, still does play a role there. And then digital measurement Marketing Mix is kind of one of the key reasons why this whole debate started. And that measurement in Marketing Mix is typically at the total platform level. And so we'll present some rules also in terms of some hygiene and best practices in terms of what level should you be measuring at. But for instance, here we are looking at multiple platforms. And in this case, the key rule that I would look at is what's the level of impressions behind these tactics in order to kind of measure them in a Marketing Mix. Attribution, on the other hand, operates at a very different level, much more granular, driven by pay-for-performance needs on digital platforms and how to optimize those. So for instance, here we are looking at output from attribution that's getting down to multiple levels: publishers, creatives, placements, ad types. All of these levels are key factors in driving programmatic execution, for instance, or even like setting optimization rules around digital execution from a tactical campaign management perspective. So those are levels that attribution operates at, which Marketing Mix typically doesn't even get into. Also, when we say that they speak different languages, there's some simple things that I've seen in the past that create confusion. So for instance, you'll see digital display with a 2% contribution, and then you look at attribution results, they'll say that, okay, it's a 20% lift, and that creates alarm. And the key thing to remember is contribution doesn't equal lifts. Contributions are over a much longer time period, typically a year, with a much larger denominator versus lifts that are within just the campaign time period. It's important to look at lifts during the campaign time period to understand campaign performance, but contributions are more about kind of holistic program investment in an annual planning setting. Also, the other frequent kind of rookie error I look at is comparing ROI versus ROAS. And this, I mean, obviously, it doesn't happen as commonly. Most people do understand it. But just as a simple point there, ROAS is dollar sales driven per dollar spent on a marketing activity compared to ROI that takes margins into account, and therefore they are not absolutely comparable. With all of those kind of more straightforward factors, there's, after adjusting to all of those, there's still instances quite often where these two will yield divergent results. And the divergence is inherently because they're different models, right, and need to understand what one is doing versus the other is doing. and yet it's critical to create alignment between the two. First of all, obviously, everybody likes kind of the one version of the truth. But that said, also where attribution is managing the more tactical campaign strategy, campaign execution, however, marketing mix does measure digital. And when you talk about annual budget allocation and budget planning, how much money gets allocated to digital is still driven out of marketing mix. And that creates the conflict. So if you have these two going in different directions on different platforms in terms of their returns, so then you'll see one set of findings coming out of your attribution thing that I should be investing more in online video, and then marketing mix is not going to be doing that because they are divergent. So reconciliation is critical, and that starts with kind of recognizing some of the limitations. So especially when it comes to marketing mix is still a critical top-down management tool as George had laid out. It's still heavily used in annual strategic planning, but that said, you need to understand where to draw the line in some cases. So especially when you're talking about targeted activity, geo-targeted activity, where the data is quite granular in terms of how you're targeting, that level of targeting and matching to consumption, the cause and effect, is typically challenging from a marketing mix perspective. And then also, from a traditional marketing mix perspective, you're using a one-size-fits-all approach. And what that means is basically, since you're measuring annual programs, and if you ran 3 waves, you had a back-to-school campaign, a Father's Day campaign, and 2 other campaigns that you're running, and targeting either existing consumers or new buyers or new consumers, there are different goals for each of these campaigns. And when you try to measure them as a whole in marketing mix, the average is not reflective of what the individual campaign set out to do. And therefore, the results and the strategy coming out of that might be in conflict. So that's, again, something to keep in mind. And then synergies. This is a critical aspect. Marketing mix obviously is not using single source data. It's using more aggregate data. And synergies, especially when you're looking at digital tactics, synergy between social and search or social and display and stuff like that, it's very difficult to do that without kind of bringing in how much combined exposure I have, right? So that single source becomes critical. And then there's also the cycle time and the cadence, the latency aspect that George talked about. So there are some decisions that need to happen in a much more quicker cadence that attribution typically leverages. And marketing mix, with all of the breadth and measurement it brings, comes at the cost of cycle time. So you need to understand which tool to deploy when for what sort of decisions. And then, but that's there's pros and cons with attribution too, bottom-up approach, and then typically excluding offline platforms. And where it gets the granularity and the rapid cycle times, the offset of that is that when you're looking at that shorter cycle time, you're ignoring some of the longer-term impacts of advertising, right? So you're looking at a very tactical view of things and ignoring brand building to some degree there. So, and then finally, the non-marketing aspect, right? So some of the decisions that marketing takes into account in allocation across tactics is also looking at some of the headwinds or tailwinds the brand might be facing from a non-marketing driver's perspective, the competitive environment and stuff like that. And that's something that may yield a different strategy of the marketing mix versus things that the attribution is indicating. So those are, again, factors to keep in mind. So now we have all the caveats in place, all of the pros and cons between marketing mix and attribution, but we still set about to kind of chart a course towards attribution. And where that starts with is a process of course correction. So invariably, when you have 2 different statistical models, 2 different approaches, trying to do 2 different things with the same set of tactics, you're bound to have divergent recommendations or divergent findings coming out of these. But in general, you need to allow for course correction in there. And so what that means is basically, if you recognize what each does best, marketing mix, it has a better view of the offline world, and then attribution has a better view of the digital world. And if you recognize that, and then recognize that these 2 still need to measure everything or control for everything to some degree, then course correction becomes a closed loop where whenever you update the marketing mix models, you take into account any known information up until that point out of other models, including attribution, in terms of how digital tactics have performed, and those become guardrails. And then when you update your attribution models, which typically should be controlling for offline activity, what do those offline activity contribute, or what's the impact, controlling for those appropriately? And for the technical folks in the audience, how we, for instance, at IRI set about to do this is leveraging Bayesian priors. Whenever like the mix model is updated, taking in priors as guardrails to ensure that the digital tactics we measure are in alignment with what the attribution model indicated. And the attribution models, in turn, take cues from marketing mix in terms of what the offline tactics are. So it becomes a sort of a closed loop system there. And then the course correction, what it does in a typical year in the life of a marketer is that it ensures that where your digital tactics, for instance, here we have a bunch of display campaigns that happen during a marketing year, and then you have the marketing mix measurement on the other side, and let's say that they did not land in the same place. If I looked across the combined impact of all of the campaigns, they were higher than what the marketing mix indicated. In this case, the course correction ensures that whenever display allocation, display budget management happens from marketing mix perspective, it recognizes the true impact that, or the more accurate impact that digital had coming out of the attribution model. And similarly, when the attribution model updates other tactics, it recognizes how to control for offline tactics. But anyway, this ensures that there's just one version of truth happening in there. And then how does that play out from a marketing kind of a year in the life? You have multiple decision points, multiple milestones from marketing planning perspective that each of these two address. And basically, you will have them set up a cadence of marketing mix contributing to certain activity, the strat plan and the AOP that happen early on in the fiscal year, deciding how much budget gets allocated to different tactics. And then you have the upfronts happening where you come up with more concrete plans in terms of allocation and possibly like mid-year alignments. So there are these discrete milestones that marketing mix is engaging on, and then there's a continuous cadence of campaign management that happens, ongoing digital campaigns that run on 2 to 4 week cadences that attribution addresses. And the course correction ensures that marketers are working off of common set of assumptions. So we saw kind of some from a little bit more deeper view of how we can ensure alignment between these two different modeling approaches and what that means in terms of course correction and single version of the truth. But that said, you're still, this shouldn't be as good as it gets, right? I mean, it should be, from a future perspective, we need to have a process that doesn't need kind of a little bit more forced-in alignment. For the short term, it's critical you have two different approaches that need to have some degree of convergence, but the future definitely should hold better things. And from that perspective, what we later on, what George mentioned early on, ensemble models, is something that has been talked about in the industry, and we are at least very hopeful that this has the possibility of creating more inherent alignment, more inherent cohesiveness across different modeling platforms. And so the key thing is, interestingly, all the components are there. They're sitting in proprietary assets and sitting in walled gardens. And what we need to do is create the right set of motivations to make sure that they work together and work together well. So, for instance, one of the frameworks here we have is this integrated marketing analytics system, which is based on something called the Bayesian belief network. And what you're looking at here is a set of different inputs. You have different models here, not just marketing mix and attribution. There are brand equity models that typically leverage brand tracking data, and then there's copy tests that may happen that may provide some additional guidance around advertising levers specifically. So there are different inputs, and interestingly today, as a marketer makes decisions, they'll look at marketing mix results, they'll look at attribution results, but as they make these decisions, at the back of their mind, some of these other factors all contribute to create kind of the final decision the marketer's taking. And this is happening more latently rather than kind of more directly, more explicitly. And what the Bayesian framework does is it basically allows for integration using rules and priors to combine across these models. And then you basically, the assumption is that each of these inputs feed a whole bunch of latent metrics, including things like engagement, brand affinity, creative affinity, conversion. The framework here is not exhaustive, obviously. The whole thing with the Bayesian belief network is it should allow you to bring in as many inputs as are relevant, and you put assumptions around them. And ultimately, as you put in rules on how they combine, the model is able to test what weight or how much importance each model should be given. And finally, you have outputs in terms of recommendations and ROI guidance and allocation guidance that comes out of a much more cohesive, much more integrated, much more inherently integrated system rather than kind of a little bit more kind of effort we need to put in to create that unification. So this is just one kind of framework. It's, again, something that says Bayesian belief networks are new, but kind of doing this is a different way of looking at it. A more immediate possibility that some people have done, we, for instance, are doing at IRI, is to leverage hierarchical models that start at transaction-level data and then allow kind of bringing in single source across a number of different consumer inputs to measure at a more tactical transaction level, tactical consumer level, to a more strategic macro level in terms of allocating by consumer segments, prioritizing different segments, making strategic marketing decisions as well. So a hierarchical model that drives the full breadth of top-down and bottom-up approach. Again, something that needs a little bit more cleaning up and traction in the marketplace. So some closing thoughts. First of all, based on everything that's happening in the industry, there's a number of stakeholders in the industry, the agency community, people like George and others in the industry, Forrester and Gartner, and a number of different players in the industry have been talking a lot about unification. And what we expect to see in the immediate future is some more cogent integration between at least marketing mix and attribution, if not other techniques in there. And then a greater focus on pushing measurement down, further down, kind of that hierarchy down to household and eventually, hopefully, at the individual consumer level. And then basically, as we kind of become less daunted by the whole aspect of big data and everything else, then kind of taking into account things like data biases and how do we account for that, how do we project more appropriately findings from one universe to another. And then a key point that George had mentioned earlier, the whole not just scorecards that look back, but forward-looking, more predictive planning, right? Predictive and prescriptive planning. And then finally, much more, like as we see more traction of things like deep learning and AI within the marketing landscape, how do we use like more advanced probability-based models that help us compensate and cover some of the data gaps that exist in the marketplace today to create more integrated learning? So with that, George and I are happy to take any questions.
Joy and George, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. First question. With regards to reducing time to opportunity, since marketing mix and attribution run on different cadences anyway?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think you cut off there a little bit.
Yeah.
So the question is
sorry,
about,
I'll repeat the question. With regards to reducing time to opportunities, since marketing mix and attribution run on different cadences anyway, how do we ensure alignment?
Yeah, I think there are two things that you have to take in consideration when you look at removing frictional latency based on the necessity of having the ability to influence opportunities in the most relevant manner. So strategy is still the strategy. You don't change strategy on a weekly basis. So your MMM should ultimately give you a point-in-time understanding that your strategy is holding firm. And this is why having it done more on a quarterly cycle should give you an overarching understanding if your strategy is heading that way. From a tactical perspective, I think this is where attribution, be it digital or be it TV, it should give you an understanding if the tactical alignment or composition of those channels and mixes that are supposedly driving the strategy are running as efficiently, as effectively possible to ensure that when we look at a look back of 2017, for example, in 2018, we don't have any overarching surprises, and that we've made the tactical adjustments that are necessary where they're going to make the most meaningful impact, so the strategy is going to be delivered upon. If we're seeing that the strategy is not overarchingly delivering on whatever sales objective, we're going to have to scrutinize the strategy anyway, and that's what's going to happen is you're going to have to go dig deep in the tactical things that you're doing, and what the tactical things that you're doing are going to be in digital, search, display, video, programmatic, open exchange, or private networks, in TV, network mix, print, out of home. You're going to look at the tactical things that are underpinning the strategy. So I think you need to look at them for what they are meant to do. My argument was that we need to do them on a more frequent basis so you at least have that information when you can use it the most.
Next question. Can you please talk about how MMM outputs can be used to inform IRI media lift?
Yes, yeah. Basically, if you think about what marketing mix is doing, so when you talk about IRI lift, we are looking at measuring digital campaigns and digital executional elements down to very tactical levels, including placement and ad types and so on and so forth. And when you do that, in these models, typically, you should be controlling for, even at the household level, for offline factors. So for instance, we match store level data to look at in-store activities and in-store promotions. We also match television data and all of those to control for. So to make sure that in between the test and control universes, you are accounting for differences in activities, in these offline activities, while trying to quantify the impact of the digital campaigns and the executional elements. So when you do that, if you're not controlling, if the weights that you use for the impact of offline tactics aren't accurate, you can over or underestimate some of the digital tactics. So with the whole one version of the truth, what we do there is take the inputs for these activities, for all of these offline activities that are used as control, as cues from the marketing mix, and use them as guardrails as we kind of run the attribution models to more accurately quantify the impact of the digital activities down to those granular tactical levels.
Next question. I'm new to this field and found it very useful. Is predictive analytics possible, or is this overpromise?
It's possible. It's possible with a caveat, right? So the notion of prediction is with the understanding that you've had a fundamental, true understanding of the past. So you can't really predict into the future unless you've done a really comprehensive work about understanding how the past has behaved, accounting for the things that you've done in the past, right? Now you're assuming if you take, let's say, 2 to 3 years of information, you're not going to look at predicting the future based on 2015 data. What you will do is hold back a portion of that information, typically 6 months, let's say sometimes 3 months, And what you're accounting for is the necessity of recency. So you're still accounting for the past, but you're accounting for the influence of the recency, because things in today are not necessarily what they were in the past, right? Consumer behavior, economic conditions, your marketing, your mix, your spend, your competitive pressures, your pricing, your promotions, all those things are different. But you need to account for that. So if you've done that, your ability to predict in the future becomes a lot more powerful. Now, your prediction is only as good as what your outcome is going to tell you 3 to 6 months from now. And when you predict on something, you know, you'll do let's say 5 to 7 what-if scenarios or simulations, right? If I do this, what is the likely outcome of that mix or that change? And your prediction score, when you end up on it, is going to give you a pretty good indication, have I accounted enough for the past and the influence of the present, and is the future behaving the way I thought it was going to behave? And the more you can accurately tighten the prediction element, you're going to feed that back into the model, because you're going to have more recent data, and you're going to account for the more recency of that data, and you're going to account for the efficacy and accuracy of that prediction. So then your prediction becomes stronger over time. So yes, you can accurately do prediction, but in order to start that process, you have to have a really tight understanding of the past with an understanding of the recency of the present.
Right, and if I may add there really quickly, completely aligned with correcting the models and updating the models. The one place where I think the industry has challenged a little bit is where you take learning from one situation, either one tactic, a brand is doing a certain set of tactics and is trying to enter a tactic that has been done before, or you have a new brand and you're trying to figure out what's the right mix of execution to go after that. So that's where you're trying to take learning from one situation and extrapolate to another. And this is where probably the accuracy stuff, you need to bring in additional assumptions, and this is where all of the advances in deep learning and neural nets are going to make a lot of impact. As you get more and more consumer-level data, you're making behavioral assumptions based on historical data and based on new situations to kind of make predictions in situations where you haven't the model hasn't seen before. So that's, I think, a new and evolving space there in terms of predictive power.
Those are all the questions we've received today. Do you want to add some final thoughts before we close?
George?
Yeah, I think hopefully everybody enjoyed what they heard. Hopefully everybody walked away with more understanding of the space than they walked into it. It's not going to be the last discussion, I'm sure. It's a powerful discussion. It's a discussion that I encourage everybody that's on the line to have with your colleagues, upper and lower, with your partners, with your vendors, with industry bodies. So the more we have these types of conversations, the expectation is that the more we challenge and the more thought and understanding and contradiction we bring to the table, the evolution of this is only gets stronger. So that's my closing thought is take a vested interest in this, because otherwise it's not going to move at the pace that we need it to.
Yeah, and I'll quickly chime in there. I think after you're not going to hear the last of this. And the one thing that I've heard from others before, I heard even recently, and I like to repeat, which is basically all models are wrong, some are useful, and that is profound. So I think if we stop falling in love with our own models and recognize that there will be gaps, and how do you augment for that gaps, look for augmenting information from multiple sources to create that ensemble learning, I think that's going to be a big step forward in this journey.
I'd like to thank Joy and George for taking the time to present their work to our webcast crowd, and everybody that was able to join us. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour or first hour at work joining us for our webcast. Thank you both. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.